All right, what is up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the Bobcast. To everyone who's playing in their fantasy playoffs this week, or who just wants some fantasy advice, we got you. We got the fantasy experts, the fantasy god, Arjun in the house today to give us some help. And we're going to
Yo,
start
what's
off
up?
by discussing some running backs. We're going to go through five starts and five sits. And let's start it off with the starts. Arjun, number one, you have Miles Sanders, some guy who's been up and down, who had a great game last week against a tough run defense. Why are you trusting Sanders this week?
So Sanders, for the most part this year, has been, I'd say, a very big letdown for his RB1 price tag, first round price tag that most people draft him at. And I'd say, even though that's it's partially the workload he's been getting, I'd say it's also mostly the fact that Wentz has been absolute garbage this year. And given how bad he's playing and how much they're down in games, that's probably the reason. That's most likely the reason for his workload diminishing and just being down all the time, not getting the amount of rushes he would usually get, and Wentz has just not been good. So other teams can just focus on getting not getting rushes and not getting rushed on by Miles. So what Jalen Hurts took over as the starting quarterback against he looked better. Miles, the overall offense just looked a lot better, and that just gives everyone as a whole a huge upgrade. And as we saw them take on the extremely vaunted Saints defense last week, where it was Jalen Hurts' first start, and everyone was like, "Oh no, what's going to happen? This may not be good at all." And Miles Sanders was considered a must sit last week, and he went off for an insane game. I think it was how many points? 30 points.
3 points, something like that, yeah.
Yeah. So if you can do that against the Saints defense, this is a not as good. This is still a good Arizona defense, but not nearly as vaunted as the Saints defense. And I would give Miles Sanders, if you have any question about starting him, even though he may not get the workload that other RB1s get, and you have to give it to someone like the Boston Scott, you cannot go against his talent, and you have to trust it against this Arizona defense after what he just did to that Saints defense.
For sure. Number two, this is a guy who's been up and down also. Last week, he had a breakout game, or what feels like a breakout game because he was mediocre for so long. And his name is Jonathan Taylor on the Colts. And he's still in an offense where it's kind of still a three-headed monster. You don't know which running backs are going to go off any given week, but you're still rocking with him this week. Tell us why.
So Jonathan Taylor is started off the at earlier in the year. He didn't look that good. I'd say like watching some Colts games, he wasn't making cuts. He looked very slow, and you can tell that with how the Colts had how Frank Reich used him. Like he was getting like less and less touches, and then suddenly he was like in a huge three-headed backfield with Wilkins and Hines for like a solid 3 week, 4 week stretch. And then suddenly, recently, he's gotten a lot more touches. And you could see that they finally, for some reason that I'm not too sure of, they've given him back the workload that he had very early in the season when uh, Marlon Mack went out. And he's run with it now. He is producing very well. He looks a lot better. So, with the matchup against who is it this week?
Texans, great.
The Texans. Yes, the Texans. Extremely great defense, right? No, yeah. This you have to give Jonathan Taylor a start. He's been going great recently, and with the amount of touches he's getting, he's with at
Oh,
least
yeah.
15, possibly like 20 easily. He will
Yeah.
easily pass, I think, 15 points.
Oh, yeah. And he's catching the ball too. He just caught a touchdown last week, or in the week before. And like, he just seemed like it came out of nowhere. He just got 22 carries out of nowhere. So definitely a juicy matchup, must start. And the next one you have is an interesting one. Jeff Wilson Jr. on the 49ers. And we just heard Raheem Mostert is playing. He is active against the Cowboys. So why do you think that Jeff Wilson is a play this week?
So with if Mostert was fully healthy, I'd be less high on Wilson. However, Mostert is coming into this game with injury, and that's making Wilson a very intriguing flex option, if not even a low end RB2, because of the possible workload he could receive against what is a very bad Dallas running defense, or just a defense in general. And with that, that is basically the main reason. Jeff Wilson in this scheme that Kyle Shanahan has, any running back can do good. You've seen, I think, 5 running backs this year on this team who constantly get injured, and someone comes up replaces them, and they all end up just putting up really good numbers. So anyone who is getting a good decent amount of touches in this game should be should be considered like a viable starting option. And with
Right.
them
Matchup.
getting probably a 50-50 with Mostert, I would say uh this he could possibly get like 12 touches, and that could be easily be enough to get with a
Right.
touchdown. That could easily be RB2 or even a flex, just a flex.
Right. That's a good point because it's looking like he's going to get the goal line carries, which obviously is the most important. And it's a very inviting matchup against the Cowboys. So I can totally see why he's a must start. Number 4, we have someone who's emerged of late, who started off the season a little bit shaky, who had a lot of competition. Cam Akers of the Rams. He's got a great matchup against the Jets. Is that why you like him this week?
Cam Akers has really emerged. I thought this at the beginning of the year. I thought this was going to be Darrell Henderson's backfield with how Cam Akers was not
Yeah.
getting looked at any touches, if like at all, coming like the first few games of the year. And then suddenly in the last 2 weeks, boom, 21 rushing attempts against Arizona, 29 against New England. That's some insane number. And so now going into the Jets, where unlike the other 2 games where even the game script wasn't predicted to be in their favor, now they're going to a game against the Jets where the game script will be in their favor the whole game. They're going to be up, so they can just be running the ball. And we all know Sean McVay, offensive, like a really smart offensive guru, is going to be able to design a lot of plays for Cam Akers to get the ball in his hands and keep the clock running against this terrible Jets team. So this game script is just going to be extremely in his favor. No, it doesn't look like the Rams are going away from him. The last three
Yeah.
weeks are not a fluke. This is his backfield now, and no one's taking it away from him.
Yeah, he's getting the bulk of the carries. Darrell Henderson Jr. is fading away. Yeah, Malcolm Brown is a non-factor anymore. It's as good of a start as you can make. And then finally, on the Ravens, we have J.K. Dobbins, another guy who has emerged kind of late into the season. I think we're seeing a trend here. He's in a decent matchup against the Jags. Tell us why you like J.K. Dobbins this week.
So J.K. Dobbins, as a guy I personally drafted in a couple of my fantasy leagues, is someone was kind of frustrating this whole year as a guy who got touches kind of taken away from him in like a three-headed backfield with Mark Ingram and Gus Edwards and himself. And now since Mark Ingram has come back from his injury, he hasn't been getting the ball that much. And last week we saw him get 1 snap the whole game. And if that's any indication of what Mark Ingram's status in this backfield is, then that looks very good for J.K. Dobbins and what could potentially be his backfield from now, where he's averaging around 60% of the snaps, and he's getting around 15 touches a game. And now against a Jacksonville defense, which is very bad, and in a very good game script where they're going to be ahead with how this offense has been looking the last couple of weeks, especially against Cleveland. Um, this looks like a game. This looks like it could be J.K. Dobbins' breakout game, and I could see him getting easily north. He is a high RB2 in this game. I can see him easily, maybe even getting a mid RB1 finish with how
Yeah,
good he's been with his trend so far in the last few weeks.
absolutely. I could see easily over 100 yards in a touchdown game, which was
Oh yeah,
in the playoffs, which is absolutely fantastic and absolutely crucial. Great. Now let's move on to the sits. A little bit more interesting. You have what was going into fantasy considered a consensus top three pick, Ezekiel Elliott of the Cowboys. And you think he is a must sit this week. Why is that?
So Z coming into the year was obviously a top three, but ever since Dak's injury happened, it's been a much bigger hit than we all thought for this whole offense. And the biggest biggest victim of that injury so far has been Zeke. As in, he started off the year with I think what was his best start in his whole career, fantasy wise, and now he's hit rock bottom, and he is getting going mid RB2, and that's just not looking good in any way for him for fantasy. And I think since the injury, he's had 2 games above 10 points. And that is not what you're
Yeah,
looking for in a guy that is supposed to be your RB1, your undisputed RB1. And now he's going up against San Francisco, which is one of the best defenses, even with all the injuries they've had, still a probably a top 5 defense in the NFL. And I would not start him against this really good run defense.
for
And
sure.
now
And that, yeah,
he's also splitting touches with Tony Pollard.
yeah,
And there's even been news recently that he's suffered an injury and he may even not even play this week. So if
yeah.
that's any indication of whether you should start him or not, that's enough.
Yeah, that's the thing with running backs. You just they're so dependent on the offense in general that like when someone like Dak Prescott goes down, who is so much in control of the offense, everyone else suffers. Um,
Yeah,
conversely, that can also help you though when you're someone like Jeff Wilson Sr. in a dynamic offense who loves to run the ball, or Chris Carson. So number
that's
two,
100% true.
number two, we have what seems to be maybe a start, but you like DeAndre Swift as a sit. He has a pretty decent matchup, and that's the reason I say a lot of players might be starting him this week. He has a pretty decent matchup against the Titans, but you still think that he's a sit this week. Why is that?
So I think he's a sit this week because if Stafford doesn't play, and we all know Ragnow already isn't, I think this team is going to suffer a lot offensively in the
Mhm.
terms of being able to move the ball in any way, shape, or form. Because with Chase Daniels as our quarterback, it's not going to look good. And this offense, and no Kenny Galladay, so our offense as a whole is just going to suffer. And even though this is a great matchup, Tennessee is not a good defense at all. Um, DeAndre Swift is just going to find it really hard to find holes to run through when they're going to be focused on him as the main as the main player on this offense now without Stafford and Galladay.
Right, and like you could totally see how the game script would just flip against him if they get down early, which most likely, without Stafford, is looking like they will. And you can't rely with Swift. You can't rely on the goal line carries because we know those are going to Adrian Peterson. So
Yeah.
very low upside. Don't think he's a start either. And then number three, I think, is a guy who maybe started off the season with high expectations to exceed what he did last season, but probably has been kind of disappointing. That's Devin Singletary of the Buffalo Bills. I know Devin Singletary is a very hated running back of yours. So why don't you tell us why he is a must sit this week?
So ever since the beginning of this year, I've always called him Singletart, Devin Singletart, because ever since the beginning of the year, I've seen Zach Moss as the biggest um threat to his carries, and he has them. As whenever Zach Moss is healthy, he's been poaching a lot of his carries. And if you look just to last week, I think Zach Moss poached almost all the touches. He posted a lot of touches last week. He had 13. Zach Moss had 13 touches to Devin Singletary's 8. And even though Devin Singletary had 24 to 4 the week before, it's a very volatile offense. You don't know who's getting what, and I wouldn't trust either one of them in this point. If I had to choose, I would pick Zach Moss because he's more likely to get the red zone and the goal line work, and touchdowns obviously is king in fantasy. So I would not trust Devin Singletary at all with with in the fantasy playoffs. Not even as a flex, nothing. I would bench him straight.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to trust a guy like that who's so inconsistent, especially when you're coming up during the playoff weeks. He's not a guy who you want to rely on in your fantasy lineups. Not at all. And then number 4, we have someone who kind of took advantage of the situation early on when Joe Mixon went out. And he looked like he might be a reliable option going forward. But after Joe Burrow went down, that whole situation kind of went downhill. And obviously, the player we're referring to is Giovanni Bernard, the running back for the Bengals. And what seems to be a decent matchup, but or sorry, no, he's playing the Steelers. That's a terrible matchup. Is that why he's a sit?
Well, even if that was even if he was the main running back, I would still sit him because it is the Steelers, and that is probably the number one defense in the NFL right now.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
without that, he has lost touches to Sabaji Perine and Travion Williams. He had 6 touches last week combined compared to 12 for Samaje Perine and 15 for Travion Williams. So if you even look at like that, he's not like ever since that fumble, I don't think he played like once he fumbled early on in the game, the Bengals chose to go a different route and give Samaje Perine and Travion Williams the ball.
Mm-hmm.
And Bernard didn't play until very late in the game, and even then he barely got anything. So if that's any indication, this is a 3-headed backfield at best, and if not, Gio is not going to be the starter.
Yeah, I mean,
And like,
just in case anyone
and
was playing him, do not play Giovanni Bernard.
there is no point. Yeah, like if you were considering playing him, don't touch him now. I think he's at this point potentially droppable.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. And then number 5 to top it off, we have another first round pick, late first round, early second round pick, in the fantasy draft, at least consensually, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And you think he's a must sit this week, going against a tough Saints defense. But it did just get gashed by Miles Sanders last week. We talked about how he got 30 points. But you think Edwards-Helaire is a sit. Why don't you tell us why?
So even though I use the argument for Miles Sanders as a start for he gashed the Saints, and that's the reason why you should start him against Arizona, and that's like a 1-week sample. I think that's different because of the fact that this is a new offense, and in it, like because now Jalen Hurts is running the show, and because of that, you should take that chance with Miles Sanders. However, with Clyde, we've seen him so far this year. It's been extremely volatile with how he's gone, and New Orleans, even with that game, is still a top 3 run defense in the league, and I would not consider starting. Hilaire is still a very iffy start against this team, especially when he's giving up. He still plays, I think, like 60%, 60% of the snaps. It's just very tough to start him against a team like this.
Right.
And
it is a team with a
giving up
script. Great defense. I just don't see the game script working for him in the sense that, like, I think this is going to be a slugfest, an offensive slugfest with Drew Brees coming back. I think Kansas City is going to resort to what they do best, which is throwing the football. And it's even more scary once you consider the Saints, when defending tight ends, Malcolm Jenkins has not been very good. So, I mean, Kelsey is going to most likely have a field day. And so I can just totally see him going for 350, 400. Helaire not getting the work, not getting the volume that he needs to actually be a reliable fantasy option. So, totally.
especially against Yeah, especially against the Saints team.
Yeah,
And with him averaging like his one game last week of getting 21 touches,
yeah.
it's and who did they even play? They played
The
Miami last week,
Dolphins. Yep.
and
He was terrible. He
yeah,
was terrible. Yeah,
not good.
yeah.
He got most of his points from receiving work, and he I got 5 receptions. That's not something he's had since week 3. He's like mostly good for 2 receptions. Rushing has not been doing well this year at all. He's a very unreliable in touchdowns, and now going against the best fantasy defense with for respect to running backs, not a
Yep,
good look for him this week.
yep.
And I would at best consider him a flex play, but I would probably not start him at all.
At best, flex and totally don't even think about when it comes to start someone like Montgomery over him, start someone like Cam Akers over him, start someone like Mike Davis over him. It should be a no-brainer.
I'd
Um,
start Drake over him, Gallman over him.
Great.
I'd start
Gallman,
Kareem Hunt over him.
absolutely. All
Yeah,
right, guys. Well, there you have it. 5 starts, 5 sits at the running back position. Good luck this week to all of you who are in the fantasy playoffs, and hopefully you bring home the gold. Make sure to check out our other video we're going to do on wide receivers. We're going to do top 5 wide receiver starts, top 5 wide receiver sits. And check out our other videos if you haven't. Make sure to subscribe, leave a like on the video, and we'll see you in the next one.